You are listening to a Sinspirational interview on the Faithful Sinners. Well, I got the opportunity today to spend some time with my dad on Memorial Day, and we are actually up north in, is it Pine Bend?
Pine Bend.
Pine Bend, Minnesota, where my stepmother is buried, and obviously enjoying the beautiful weather we have today, but taking the time out to come and spend it visiting her and seeing some other family and friends that are up this way as well. So since I had this opportunity, I figured it's going to be a great chance to pose a faithful sinner question to my father and see what his perspectives are and go from there. So faithful sinners, are you familiar really with what we're doing?
Not really.
Okay. Well, as you may out there know, faithful sinners is basically people seeking to navigate their lives with clarity and grace through sharing and understanding and embracing the power of sin. And embracing the power of sin is really understanding the impact sin can have. It doesn't mean sin's right or wrong, because everybody has different perspectives and different views on things, and culturally there's different ways of viewing things. So as far as our position, it's being able to provide a platform for us to have discussions so we can better understand one another and build our communities, because that's kind of where we're starting to see a downfall, is just simple communication happening. But typically when I meet with people, I like to ask them a baseline question and just to get some perspective from you and where you are in your life. And if you were to think about a moment in your life that stands out to you where you are either not living or did not act in a way that was aligning with who you believe yourself to be, what's a moment in your life that really stands out to you?
Oh, when I was in high school, my last 2 years, there was a Youth for Christ club in the high school, and there was a fellow named Richard Norton, or Dick Norton, and he used to use his 55 Chevrolet to come around and pick up the kids and stuff when we were having a meeting, and the officers, he'd come pick us up and get us over to the meeting. We met in the high school, and we had a couple football players that were Christians and a cheerleader, and I was president of the club, and I would get movies from a place up in Michigan called Zondervan, and they had a lot of Christian movies. I remember one especially. The name of it was Monkey Business. I can't remember exactly right now what the message was, but it wasn't about monkeys. But we would pass out flyers, and especially because some of the popular kids, were involved. We had one night where we had 300 kids that showed up for the movie.
Wow.
And then there are other high schools, had clubs too, and once a month they'd have a big rally down on Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, a place called Orchestra Hall. And I don't know how many people it held, but it held a lot of people. And a lot of times they'd put on like a musical. And I remember one time they said, "Neil, you want to drive the car?" And part of the musical had a point where this Corvette was supposed to drive out to the middle of the stage. And so they said, "Well, okay, here's the keys. We'll tell you when to start it up, and then just drive out here slowly, and here's where to park." Well, I didn't have a driver's license. I had never driven a car. So I'm sitting in the car before it was time to go out there, and I was pushing this lever and that, and all of a sudden the window wipers went on. Well, I didn't know what made them go on, so I didn't know how to get them off. And all of a sudden they're motioning to come on out. So I had to drive out there with the window wipers going. So,
But you figured out how to drive it?
I knew how to put it in gear and slowly, turn the steering wheel. But yeah, I got a lot of ridicule over driving out there and with the wipers on. There was no rain in that. But another thing is, there was a girl that we went to the same church, but we went to different high schools, and they used to have quizzing between the different schools.
Yeah.
And originally, they had three people stand in the back, and the idea was you remember to buy or a book of the Bible or a chapter, and they'd ask a question, but you could jump up before the question was finished, but you had to finish the question and then give the answer. And Kitty, my friend from a different high school, she was determined she was going to beat me. Well, they converted from having three human judges to where they had a plate you sat on your chair, and when a certain number of pounds got off that plate, a light would come on and tell who was up first. Well, I would sit at the end of we had 5 kids on a team. I'd sit at the end of my row of people from my school, and Kitty would be sitting the next school, and she'd be watching me, and I would flinch, and she'd jump up, and sometimes she'd know the answer, sometimes she wouldn't. But to this day, she tells the story too about how mad she would get at me because I'd make her to jump up. We're still friends. We're still in the same adult class at the church in St. Paul, where we both now live. So,
Well, going back to the that group in school, was that something that you continued to follow with, or where did
well,
that lead to?
well, actually, they had a council of all the different schools, and I was actually the president of the council for the city, the Youth for Christ City Council, in that. But and I graduated from high school. I left, and that's how I got up to St. Paul, Minnesota. Both Kitty and I came up at the same time to go to St. Paul Bible College. It wasn't as accredited as it is today. Today, it's called Crown College, and it's out in St. Bonifacius, Minnesota. They have a nurses program and some other programs, but I came up here because I wanted to go into youth work. And actually, when I came up here, there was Youth for Christ going on in the Twin Cities, and I was a counselor for the high school out in St. Louis Park, and they too had a couple of football players that were pretty popular with the kids in school in that. And I don't remember a whole lot about that except that we had meetings once a month too, and they had a pretty good group of kids that come out. And the president's son, his dad was the preacher, the minister of a place downtown Minneapolis called Souls Harbor, and that was not like a mega church like we have today, but it was like the mega church in Minneapolis of its time. You know, it was a large church. It was well known. Reverend Peterson was a well known minister, and I would go there sometimes. They'd have special programs that they put on, and I would go there too. But so yeah, I was involved in. I originally came up to school because I wanted to go into youth ministry and like Youth for Christ, but went to St. Paul Bible College for about a year and a half. But my parents didn't have a lot of money, and school cost money, so I dropped out and I worked for a while, and then I transferred to the University of Minnesota. I was kind of interested in art too, so I started taking commercial art classes at the university, and then I got a job at the post office, and well,
Sounds like that had a leading path for a long-term direction.
yeah, well, it was a good job, it paid well, paid $2.10 an hour, and
Oh my
and that
gosh.
was that was a good job at that time, and it had good insurance uh, too. So I kind of wanted to stay there for those reasons, but then I didn't want to stay there because you know when you started back in those days, there was no federal law about time and a half over overtime. So when you were a probationary employee, which usually took about a year before you had enough seniority to make regular, but during that time, you were on a crew that worked 6 days a week. 6 days a week wasn't just the only thing. They were 12-hour shifts because there was all straight time. So they worked at 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And wasn't Sunday that you got off or Saturday that you got off. You got either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday off. And well,
Wow.
I married Tim's mother, and that's how Tim came along, and his sister Mindy. But working at the post office didn't work out too well because I worked 3 in the afternoon till 3:30 in the morning, and Tim's mom, she got up and went to work at 8 o'clock and worked till 4:30. When she got off work, I was gone to work. And when I got home from work, she was sleeping. And sometimes I'd get up in the morning and make breakfast. We'd have breakfast. She'd go to work and we wouldn't see each other. And she'd complain about, why don't you get a real job? And I say, hey, there's a lot of people. There's firemen, there's policemen, there's truck drivers, there's places that are open 24 hours a day. I says, and it pays good, and it's good insurance, and someday I'll make regular. Well,
Yeah. Well, I ended
it,
up paying pretty good, having a good
yeah,
career out of it.
it did. I stayed there probably too many years, but I stayed there for 41 years, and always had some kind of sidekick on the side. I worked at Kenny Shoes. I drove school bus for 10 years, and I guess I was always the guy that figured things out because the school bus drivers, they paid us the same amount of pay that the custodians got paid because they had to work in the afternoon and then finish their 8 hours in school. And they had a union. So every 2 years, they'd get a little pay raise, but the school district always paid the bus drivers whatever they got,
Hmm.
but we didn't have to be in their union. Well, 2 years after I started, their union got them out of driving.
Hmm.
We didn't get any raise. And the women are saying, Neil, look at your check. We didn't get a raise. The custodians got a raise. How come we didn't get a raise? It says, because their union got them a raise. We're not part of their union. You don't have nobody speaking for you. You got to start a union. And the ladies, oh, they'll find out who's trying to do that. They'll fire us. No, they can't do that. And there was another guy driving. He was the safety manager at the post office. So we know how to deal with unions. And so I called the State Mediation Service Bureau and told them we wanted to start a union for the bus drivers. So they notified the school district, and school district was nice enough. They gave us a room to come meet in and have a vote one evening. And I told everybody, 50% of you better show up and vote yes, because if you don't get 50%, you're not going to get a raise. So there was enough showed up, and Bob and I ended up putting our tie on and suited and going in talking to the school lawyers, and we brought in the pay scales of the schools that were getting paid a little bit more than we were, and they were accurate. Of course, we didn't give them all the ones that were below us, but apparently they didn't really check around too much because there wasn't any question. They came back, gave us an offer of a small pay raise. It wasn't a lot, but we didn't argue and we didn't go back and forth. We just accepted it because we had our foot in the door. We're a union now. And so 2 years later, went in and I said, you got some of the women that drive in the morning, they drive a kindergarten route, they drive an afternoon route, they're driving over 6 hours a day. So they should be able to earn sick leave for a day, 6 hours, if they're really sick and and they need to take a day off, that they would get paid their day. Those that are less than 6 hours, well, we're not asking for the part-time people that don't drive a full day. And the other thing we know is we know what the seniority list is. And instead of just assigning routes to everybody, it would be a good idea if they'd call everybody in by seniority and just let them pick their route. The routes all are about the same size, so the pay's not much different, but some people would like to pick a route, for maybe a school their kid goes to or whatever. But we do have the seniority, and that's one thing we'd like is be able to come in and pick our routes. And so they gave us that too, without any argument. And then they had to post all the routes on the board, and they'd call us in one at a time. I've been driving for about 4 years, so when it came my turn, I had enough seniority to pick the route I really wanted. It was the route that had Visitation, St. Thomas, St. Michael's, St. Joe's, Brady, St. Croix Lutheran. They were all the parochial schools. The route didn't pay that much less. It was a little bit shorter, but those kids all behaved. If somebody gave you a bad time or was fighting, all you had to do is tell the principal or the sister of that school that would come out and meet the bus, and they'd let their parents know, and they behaved. But one day it was kind of funny. I went into the district office and I asked the transportation director, "Do you think it would be okay if I put some speakers in my bus?" And he said, "Speakers?" I said, "Yeah, kind of like you put in your car." And I'd, have it hooked up to a wireless microphone.
This was what year?
I don't remember the year exactly, but
Early 70s, though.
yeah, early 70s. And I had a cassette thing I wanted to put underneath the deck at the school bus and have a microphone. And so he said, "Well, if it's okay with Clarence out at the garage." He was the manager of transportation at the garage. So I go say, "Hey, Clarence, I talked to Arnie, and Arnie said it was okay if I put a couple of speakers in my bus, if it was okay with you." He just said, "It's okay with Arnie, it's okay with me." So little did they know, I figured out, geez, those are metal walls and stuff. And I got some kind of big circle drill that went through metal, and I cut in the back of the bus.
Thank you for listening to our inspirational interview on the Faithful Sinners. And make sure to check us out on thefaithfulsinners.com and like and follow us on your favorite podcast and social media stations.